The pathetic aliens always avoided the dreaded dark zone, like cowards running from a fight, but the brave humans always ventured forth without fear, as the alien onlookers gasped in shock. "Captain, this star system is uncharted and possibly full of danger," Officer Jim, second in command, said nervously. "The Alien Federation is warning us to avoid it." "We do not take orders from them," Jim shouted aggressively, slamming his fist on the command console. Humanity did not become the dominant power in the galaxy by cowering in fear. We must establish a foothold in this system, or the weaker alien races will think we have gone soft. Jim gripped his plasma rifle tightly. He knew that this mission would decide the fate of humanity's dominance for generations to come. The human shuttle touched down on the landing pad with a hiss of hydraulics. Captain Jim stepped out first, his boots clanking on the metal surface. He squinted in the bright light of the alien sun, taking in the strange architecture of the Federation headquarters. It was a sprawling crystalline structure, all smooth curves and shimmering surfaces, unlike anything he had seen before. A delegation of aliens was waiting to greet them. They were tall and slender, with smooth blue skin and large almond-shaped eyes. The leader of the group, High Counselor Varilax, stepped forward. He towered over Jim by at least a foot. Varilax gave a terse nod of greeting, his expression unreadable. "Welcome to the Galactic Federation headquarters, Captain Jim," Varilax said in a deep, resonant voice. "Please follow me inside." Jim motioned for his team to fall in behind him as they followed Varilax into the building. The interior was just as strange and alien as the exterior. The walls were made of a translucent material that seemed to glow from within. Strange, organic-looking sculptures lined the halls. Varilax led them into a large circular room. Representatives from a dozen different alien races were seated around a central table. They turned to stare at the humans as they entered. Some looked curious, others apprehensive. Jim could feel the weight of their gazes on him. "Allow me to introduce Captain Jim and his team from the human race," Varilax said to the assembled aliens. "They come seeking to establish diplomatic relations with the Federation." A murmur went through the room. Jim stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Thank you for welcoming us here today," he said, projecting confidence into his voice. "We humans are a peaceful race. We only wish to explore the galaxy and forge new alliances." Varilax nodded slowly. "I'm afraid we have reason to be cautious of unknown species," he said. "The Federation has been at war with the Zorgons, a hostile insectoid race, for decades now. We cannot afford to let our guard down." "I assure you we are not a threat," Jim replied firmly. A thin green-skinned alien spoke up from across the table. "You'll forgive us if we don't take you at your word," he said, his voice dripping with suspicion. "In fact, I've been studying your species since you arrived in this sector, and I must say, you bear a striking resemblance to the Zorgons themselves." Jim bristled at the accusation. "That's preposterous," he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "We are nothing like those creatures." The green alien, who Jim would later learn was named Xyloth, leaned forward with a sneer. "Oh, really? The same bipedal structure, the same smooth skin, the same facial features. How do we know you're not simply Zorgon spies, sent to infiltrate the Federation?" The room erupted into shocked whispers. Jim could feel his face flushing with anger. "I won't stand here and listen to these baseless accusations," he growled. "We came here in peace, and this is how you treat us." Varilax held up a hand for silence. "Enough," he said firmly. "We will investigate these claims thoroughly before making any judgments. In the meantime, Captain Jim, I suggest you and your team return to your shuttle until we call for you." Jim wanted to argue, but he knew it was pointless. The damage had been done. As he turned to leave, he could feel the eyes of the aliens boring into his back. The seeds of mistrust had been sown, and he knew it would be an uphill battle to prove humanity's intentions were pure. The tense negotiations were suddenly shattered by the blaring of alarms throughout the crystalline structure. Red lights flashed, and a deafening siren wailed. High Counselor Varilax's eyes widened as he looked at a holographic display. "A Zorgon fleet just dropped out of hyperspace. They're attacking the planet," Varilax shouted over the alarms. Panic erupted in the chamber as the various alien representatives scrambled to evacuate, some literally leaping over the conference table in their hasty to reach the exits. Within seconds, Jim, Sarah and Alex were left standing alone in the empty room, the alarm still screaming. "We need to get back to the shuttle now," Jim barked. They sprinted through the winding hallways, the flashing red emergency lights casting eerie shadows. In the hangar bay, they skidded to a halt. Their sleek human shuttle sat on the landing pad, but it was surrounded by a dozen Zorgan soldiers. The insectoid warriors were huge, easily 7 feet tall, their segmented purple exoskeletons bristling with jagged spikes. Each one carried a large, intimidating energy blaster rifle. "Surrender, pathetic humans!" The lead Zorgan soldier droned in a hissing metallic voice. It gestured with its claw-like appendages. "You cannot escape!" "I don't think so, Bugface," Jim growled under his breath. In a blur of motion, he whipped out his plasma rifle and opened fire. Searing bolts of blue plasma streaked across the hangar, catching the Zorgans off guard. 2 insectoid soldiers were blasted back. Smoking holes burned clean through their carapaces. Sarah and Alex drew their weapons and joined the fight, diving for cover behind storage crates. The human guns proved superior, their advanced plasma and Gauss rounds easily chewing through the Zorgans' exoskeletons and energy shields. Jim rolled behind a forklift as the aliens returned fire, the sizzling energy blasts leaving glowing scorch marks on the deck. Popping up, Jim drilled the lead Zorgan right between its compound eyes. The creature's head burst like a smashed pumpkin. "This is what you get for attacking our allies," Jim shouted as he gunned down 2 more soldiers with precise shots. Sarah vaulted over a crate, activating her powered armor's cloaking field. She shimmered and disappeared, then reappeared behind a Zorgan, burying her combat knife in a gap in its carapace. The alien shrieked and collapsed, ichor spraying. Alex let loose with his rotary Gauss cannon, the high-velocity slugs ripping 3 Zorgans to shreds in a heartbeat. "Damn, I love this gun." He laughed. In a matter of moments, the humans had cut down the Zorgon troops. Smoking insectoid corpses lay strewn across the hangar. Jim waved to the others. "Get to the shuttle." They ran up the ramp and threw themselves into the cockpit seats. Jim's hands flew over the controls as the engines roared to life. The shuttle lifted off the pad and rocketed out of the hangar. Chaos reigned in the skies above the planet. Dozens of angular purple Zorgon warships hung in orbit, hammering the world with plasma cannons and kinetic impactors. Flights of insectoid fighters buzzed between them, strafing the surface with energy blasts. The planetary defense fleet was already burning. Many of the delicate, graceful Fed ships shattered and drifting. Jim jinked and weaved the shuttle through the maelstrom, narrowly dodging the flak bursts and energy beams filling the air. Proximity alarms wailed as a Zorgon frigate loomed before them, its spinal railguns swiveling to lock on. But then, a storm of missiles, hyper-velocity kinetic slugs and directed energy beams slammed into the Zorgan ship's flank. Explosions blossomed along its hull, and it staggered, reeling. The USS Odyssey swept into view, the blocky human battleship driving hard into the heart of the enemy fleet. Its advanced shields shimmered as they shrugged off the Zorgon's return fire. Jim grinned savagely. "Cavalry's here." He deftly guided the shuttle into the Odyssey's open hangar bay. The humans ran down the ramp and made for the bridge at top speed. On the Odyssey's bridge, controlled chaos reigned as the crew fought the ship. The holographic tactical display showed the Odyssey cutting into the Zorgan formation like an avenging angel, tearing the enemy apart with its superior weapons, even as more insectoid ships arrived and swarmed it like angry hornets. Jim, Alex and Sarah ran onto the bridge. Jim practically leapt into the command chair. "What's our status?" he demanded. "We're giving the bugs a hell of a bloody nose," the weapons officer reported. "But there's a lot of them. We can't hold them off forever. Admiral Korolev is ordering us to regroup and withdraw." Jim shook his head vehemently. "Negative. We're not abandoning the Feds. We stay and fight until—" The Odyssey shuddered as another volley of plasma blasts hammered into its rapidly failing shields. Sparks erupted from overloaded consoles on the bridge, filling the air with the acrid stench of burnt circuitry. "Reroute all available power to forward shields and weapons," Jim barked, his fingers flying over the command console. His face was illuminated by the angry red glow of warning lights. In the heart of engineering, Alex frantically worked to keep the ship's vital systems online. He ripped open access panels, bypassing damaged circuits and jury-rigging makeshift repairs. Sweat poured down his face as he fought to coax more speed and power from the straining fusion cores. "I'm giving her all she's got, Captain," he shouted over the comm, his voice nearly drowned out by the crescendo of alarms and explosions. "But those damn bugs are hitting us too hard. We can't take much more of this." On the tactical display, Sarah's fighter wing danced and whirled around the massive bulk of the Zorgon flagship, peppering its hull with blasts from their pulse cannons and fusion missiles. The small, agile human craft dodged the storms of flak and sizzling energy beams the flagship spat back at them. "Sarah, get your team out of there," Jim ordered over the comm. "That flagship's too heavily defended. We need to regroup and—" His words were cut off as a particularly brutal salvo slammed into the Odyssey, sending him sprawling to the deck. Main lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into darkness, save for the hellish red emergency lighting. "Hull breach in sectors 12 through 17, the damage control officer shouted, his face pale. "We're venting atmosphere. Casualty reports coming in from all decks." Jim dragged himself back into the command chair, blood trickling down his face from a gash on his forehead. He stared at the tactical display, watching grimly as more and more of the Odyssey's systems blinked out. A cold realization settled over him. The Zorgons knew exactly where to hit them, exactly how to counter their tactics and technology. It was as if they could read the Odyssey's crew's minds. "We have a traitor," Jim said quietly, his voice hard as steel. "Someone's feeding the Zorgons information. That's the only way they could anticipate us like this." He closed his eyes for a long moment, a heavy weight settling on his shoulders. When he opened them again, they burned with grim determination. "Alex, Sarah, I need you both back on the Odyssey now," he ordered over the comm. "We're abandoning ship." "Abandoning? But Jim, we can still fight. We can't just leave you." Sarah's voice crackled back, edged with desperation. "I'm not asking, Sarah. That's an order," Jim said firmly. "The Odyssey is lost, but I can still buy you and the rest of the crew time to get to the escape pods." "Jim, no, we're not leaving you behind," Alex shouted, his voice thick with emotion. "So you have to," Jim said softly. "Someone has to stay and pilot the ship, and I'm the captain. This is my duty." Silence hung over the comm for a long heartbeat. Then Sarah's voice came back, trembling but resolute. "Aye, aye, Captain. We'll see you on the other side." Jim allowed himself a small, sad smile. "Give 'em hell for me." He cut the comm and turned to face the remaining bridge crew. "You all heard the order? Abandon ship, get to the escape pods now." They hesitated, faces torn, but one by one they nodded and ran for the exits. Soon Jim was alone on the shattered bridge, the only sound the wail of alarms and the groan of failing bulkheads. He gripped the control yoke and swung the Odyssey around, aiming its battered prow at the heart of the Zorgon formation. The battleship shook and shuddered as more blasts pounded its abused hull, consoles exploding and bulkheads buckling. But Jim's hands were steady on the controls as he gunned the engines to full, the abused fusion cores screaming under the strain. The Zorgon ships loomed larger and larger in the viewscreen, filling it with their jagged, alien contours. As the range dropped and the blaring proximity alarms reached a fever pitch, Jim's lips curled back in a defiant snarl. "From hell's heart I stab at thee," he whispered. Then the Odyssey, trailing fire and debris like a dying star, rammed into the lead Zorgon battleship at full speed. The Odyssey shook and groaned as it plunged towards the Zorgon flagship, its hull scorched and torn, leaking atmosphere and debris. Flames licked along its flanks as its engines pushed beyond their limits, the ship's frame shuddering under the strain. Its few remaining weapons stuttered and flashed, spitting defiant fire at the looming alien warship. On the bridge, Jim clung to the sparking, half-melted wreckage of the command chair, his uniform tattered and stained with blood and sweat. Gritting his teeth against the pain of his injuries, he kept his eyes locked on the view screen, the Zorgon flagship growing larger and larger until it filled the screen. Proximity alarms blared, nearly drowned out by the tortured scream of overstressed bulkheads. Jim's fingers danced over the controls, coaxing every last ounce of speed and maneuverability out of the dying Odyssey. He jinked and juked, narrowly evading the worst of the Zorgon's fire, even as the ship's shields collapsed and its armor peeled away. He could hear the shouts and screams of the wounded and dying over the comm, the last desperate struggles of his crew as they fought to buy him time. But he pushed it all away, his focus narrowing to the single, overriding goal: take out the flagship no matter the cost. The range ticked down, the Odyssey shaking harder and harder as the Zorgons poured fire into it. 500 kilometers, 300, 100. Jim's finger hovered over the trigger for the ship's last salvo of fusion missiles, ready to fire at point-blank range and damn the consequences. 50 kilometers, 20, 10. Jim could see the pitted, scorched hull of the Zorgon ship, could make out the individual weapon emplacements and sensor clusters. He took a deep breath, preparing for oblivion. And then, out of nowhere, a blinding flash of light erupted in the center of the view screen. Jim flinched back, shielding his eyes, certain for a split second that one of the Zorgon weapons had hit something critical and the Odyssey was going up in a ball of plasma. But as the glare faded and his vision cleared, he saw something impossible. A massive, gleaming silver shape, easily 3 times the size of the Zorgon flagship, hung in space where the flash had been. Its hull was smooth and unblemished, its lines sleek and predatory, like a shark cutting through the void. Jim's jaw dropped as he recognized it. The USS Titan, the most advanced and powerful warship ever built by human hands. And there, proudly emblazoned on its flank, was a name that sent a shock of recognition through Jim's battered body. Admiral Elena Hawkins. "Sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. As if in answer, the Titan's weapons came to life, a storm of missiles and energy beams leaping from its hull and slamming into the Zorgon fleet with devastating force. The alien ships, so terrible and overwhelming mere moments before, crumpled like tin cans under the onslaught, their hulls shattering and their reactors going critical in blinding flashes of light. The Zorgon flagship, looming over the Odyssey like a monstrous insect poised to strike, suddenly found itself in the Titan's crosshairs. A barrage of quantum torpedoes ripped into its hull, tearing through its armor like paper and burrowing deep into its core. For a split second, nothing happened, and then the Zorgon ship vanished in a sun-bright explosion, reduced to an expanding cloud of glowing plasma and molten debris. Jim watched in awe as the Titan swept through the Zorgon fleet like an avenging angel, its weapons leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. In mere minutes, the once proud alien armada was reduced to drifting wreckage, the few survivors fleeing into hyperspace with their metaphorical tails between their legs. As the last Zorgon ship winked out of existence, the comm crackled to life, a familiar voice filling the bridge. "Odyssey, this is the Titan. Good work, Captain. Now let's get you and your crew home." Jim looked up at the view screen, his vision blurring with exhaustion and emotion. As his mother's face appeared, her expression a mixture of relief, pride, and love. "Mom," he croaked out, his voice breaking. I thought I was done for. I thought we all were." Admiral Hawkins smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkling with warmth. "Never count a Hawkins out, son. We're too stubborn to die." She gestured to someone off-screen, and the Odyssey shuddered as tractor beams locked onto its hull, stabilizing its erratic tumble. "We'll tow you back to Earth orbit for repairs," the Admiral said. "And once you're patched up, I expect a full report on just what the hell happened out here. I get the feeling it's going to be one hell of a story." Jim managed a weak grin, slumping back into the wreckage of his chair as the adrenaline drained from his system, leaving nothing but bone-deep weariness in its wake. "Oh, it is," he said softly. It definitely is. As he watched the Titan pull the Odyssey into formation, the ravaged Federation fleet limping alongside them, he knew that this fight was far from over. The Zorgans had been beaten back, but they would return, angrier and more determined than ever, to exterminate humanity and their alien allies. But in that moment, battered and bleeding but alive, surrounded by the triumphant ships of the United Earth Space Fleet, Jim allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. They had won this battle, and with Earth and the Federation standing together, united against the darkness, that maybe, just maybe, they could win the war. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support me, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. And for every comment that says, "I liked the story," I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.